faithfully delivering value and interpreting the world's best books. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today I'm introducing the book called The Social Contract. It's a masterpiece of political philosophy. Its author, Rousseau, was a renowned political thinker of the 18th century, hailed as the intellectual pioneer of the French Revolution. The Social Contract is Rousseau's most important work and his only theoretical piece that directly designs political systems. As a work that profoundly influenced human development, The Social Contract frequently appears on various reading lists and is even unavoidable fundamental knowledge in political and history textbooks for basic education. B. Popular promo. But when you, as a general reader, first open this little booklet of just over 200 pages, you'll find it's a very difficult book to understand. Often, you might have no clue what Rousseau is talking about. There are two reasons for this very unpleasant reading experience. First, Rousseau wasn't a professional philosopher. His arguments are scattered, and his theoretical system isn't rigorous. Rousseau, S. F. F. Second, The Social Contract was written with a very specific audience in mind, the political opposition in Geneva. Geneva is Rousseau's birthplace. After he became famous in 1749, he consistently followed the political struggles of Geneva's commoners against oligarchic rule and became the theoretical source for this opposition. Much of the text in The Social Contract corresponds to political issues that concerned the people of Geneva. For example, in Chapter 4 of this book, Rousseau spends a great deal of space analyzing the political system of the Roman Republic, arguing for the rationality of his institutional design. How awful and compassionate arguments. Rousseau did this because the history of the Roman Republic was common knowledge among citizens of the Geneva Republic at that time, and a source of ideas for the resistors. So, for today's general readers, especially us Eastern readers, this part of Chapter 4 might seem baffling, but for the Geneva people of that time, it was remarkably familiar and easy to grasp. Therefore, to truly grasp the political principles in Rousseau's work, simply paraphrasing the book's content or picking out a few famous quotes to read is far from enough. Therefore, I'll supplement with a lot of external knowledge and explain it in two aspects. Got it. First, what kind of political system did Rousseau envision in the book? Second, how the social contract influenced history. First, let's look at the first question. What kind of political system did Rousseau design? We know that human history is a history of political order. For millennia, humanity has grappled with an eternal question. What constitutes good politics? Are existing political systems truly reasonable? Thinkers throughout the ages like Aristotle in ancient Greece and Augustine in ancient Rome all attempted to provide their own answers. By the 17th and 18th centuries, people developed new perspectives on this question. A theory gained popularity across Europe, the social contract theory. Social contract theory posits that before political order existed, humans lived in a state of nature where they enjoyed natural rights, with freedom being the most fundamental. This freedom knew no boundaries. People could act solely on their own will, but human life inevitably involves interaction with others, creating dependencies. And inevitably, conflicts and competition arise. When these conflicts intensified, people negotiated a collective order to enable better coexistence. They thus formed a social contract, voluntarily creating a community and establishing a government to manage and maintain it. This marked humanity's entry into political society. In Rousseau's 18th century, absolute monarchy dominated politics, and most educated Europeans considered this natural. Many theorists used social contract theory to justify this system. They believed humans in the state of nature couldn't handle unlimited freedom. Driven by self-interest, they'd stop at nothing, becoming savage and filthy, locked in perpetual conflict, somewhat like our concept of inherent human evil. What use was such freedom? To escape this terrifying zero-sum game, people willingly surrendered all rights, including freedom, to an absolute authority, accepting its rule. Through this pact of submission, political order emerged, finally sparing everyone from violent death. An absolute monarchy best fulfilled this requirement at the time. But Rousseau rejected this solution. In the 18th century, Europe was experiencing the Enlightenment, with many radical theorists opposing absolute monarchy. They believed it should be founded on supreme benevolence, not evil and terror. Rousseau was the champion of this proposition. In his view, to renounce freedom is to abandon the most fundamental dignity of being human. Such a thing could never be voluntary. People yielding to despotic power in reality is merely a distorted state, creating space to transform existing systems and seek better alternatives. To this end, he offered another version of the social contract. Rousseau believed human nature and the state of nature is inherently good. Initially focused solely on survival, they possessed compassion and cooperated to overcome hardships. But through this process, humans gradually amplified desires, leading to intense competition and notions of property. Rousseau termed these impulses amour propre, self-love that doesn't eradicate human kindness. But when it dominates, people encroach on others' freedom, gradually degenerating until a privileged minority forces acceptance of oppressive order through deceit or coercion, reducing others to slaves. Oh, I really want. Thus emerged today's political reality. Hence the opening line of the social contract: man is born free, yet everywhere he is in chains. Rousseau argued that human interaction is inevitable. Humanity must eventually enter political society. So, is there a way to achieve political order without anyone losing freedom? This requires overcoming two obstacles. First, establishing equal political order, since loss of equality precedes loss of freedom. Second, transforming unlimited natural freedom that prevents amicable coexistence. Rousseau proposed a model. A community forms from common interest, unanimously adopts a contract, then codifies it into law through collective authority. Finally, establishing a government within this community to enforce laws. And voila, everything's set. After all this, how does this setup connect to freedom? First, the model ensures equality because the contract requires unanimous consent, not one group imposing terms on another. This eliminates the original problem of domination during political order's establishment. Second, this contract aims to achieve common interests. Thus, through rational calculation, people relinquish unlimited natural freedom, giving birth to morality. By respecting both their own freedom and others, boundaries are set for mutual benefit. People still enjoy freedom, but now it's socially constrained, moral freedom. With both obstacles to freedom resolved, people can enjoy liberty within political order. Understanding this, we're ready to examine the social contract itself. Many terms and concepts in this book are distinctly 18th century and challenging for modern readers. In Rousseau's era, political discussions often analogize the community to a person with will and agency. For Rousseau, the political community formed by people is analogous to such a person called the sovereign. So what does sovereign mean? Earlier we mentioned the prevalence of absolute monarchy in the 18th century. At that time, sovereignty referred to the monarch's absolute power, the sovereign being the king himself, an unquestionable authority. Rousseau transformed this concept. For him, the sovereign is the political community of the people. This collective holds supreme authority, not any individual. And thus, sovereignty cannot be transferred, divided, or represented. Rousseau argued no individual could permanently align with the sovereign. Any apparent alignment would be mere coincidence. This established Rousseau's enormously influential concept: popular sovereignty. As a distinct entity, the sovereign must have its own will. The sovereign's will is the collective general will of the people, also called the general will. Here, Rousseau adapted another key 18th century concept. The single quote will, general will, volonté générale, originated as a religious notion. It held that God established impartial rules for human salvation, like a falling object affecting all equally without bias. Only when you actively understand God's will can you grasp how things work and attain salvation step by step. In the social contract, Rousseau redefined the meaning of the general will. God's general will brings salvation. The general will of the political community points toward public welfare. But Rousseau added a clarification. Could everyone agree on something that can't become the general will? Like all students supporting no punishment for cheaters, just because each acts selfishly to avoid consequences? Oh. Such shady ideas aren't the general will, yet they get passed unanimously. Rousseau called this the will of all, merely the sum of individual wills, lacking transcendence. For instance, everyone agreeing to do something bad. That's indeed a common thought, but it has no merit, whereas the general will, though from the people, has transcendence like God's justice. All right, so now our sovereign has its will. What's it used for? Under 18th century absolute monarchy, the monarch as sovereign legislated based on his private will. For Rousseau, the sovereign becomes the people's community. The people's community? Legislating by the general will, such laws are the social contract's content. Since protecting freedom is the social contract's goal, legislation sets its standards. In Rousseau's view, this is a tough task. Though the people's community aims to protect freedom, what kind is good? That's hard for them to judge. For Rousseau, making laws implements the social contract, moving people from nature to politics. Society. To achieve this, everyone must abandon all natural rights. Then, in the political community, they register and transform into social rights. To use an analogy, it's like a newborn cutting the umbilical cord to leave the past behind. If anyone clings on, keeping natural, unlimited freedom, it harms others in society. Then those who cut the cord can compel them to abandon that freedom and fully enter political society. Is this good or bad?
Since Rousseau's time, this has sparked intense debate that continues unresolved today.
To address such disputes, the political community must select a person of extraordinary wisdom, with deep insight into people's customs, desires, and understanding to assist in legislation. This person is called the legislator, like Moses among the Jews, the bridge between God and the Israelites. Through him, God proclaimed the Ten Commandments to all Jews. Rousseau believed the political community, possessing sovereignty, exercises it through legislation to protect freedom, embody the general will, and serve the public interest. The legislator's assistance is indispensable. They must be selfless, never coveting the legislative power, serving only as an advisor who departs anonymously after completing the task. Later, Rousseau himself assumed this role, becoming the legislator who drafted Poland's constitution. Not being a Polish citizen, he naturally couldn't have personal motives. Moreover, he demonstrated immense wisdom in the social contract. All right, so Rousseau envisioned a political community of the people that achieves self-governance by all members over all members. If seen as an independent entity, it has its own will, the general will. It has its purpose, public welfare, and its executive power, legislation through sovereignty.
Thus, the social contract becomes codified law, and the next step is maintaining the community's operation according to these laws.
Speaking of operation, Rousseau used an analogy. Just as a person directs limbs through brain commands, since we've conceptualized the sovereign as an independent entity, it needs limbs to act. These limbs are the government, its administration results from the sovereign's authorization. Here, Rousseau introduced another crucial concept. Unlike prior theorists who saw the social contract as between people and government, he viewed it as collectively agreed by the people, with government merely executing the community's will. So to clarify, we'll call the people's community, the former sovereign, the state, making the state government distinction easier to grasp. But Rousseau further argued that the government might usurp the master's role, becoming the ruler of the people's community. Thus, the segment of people would dominate everyone else, invalidating the social contract and dissolving the state.
Why does this happen?
Earlier we mentioned forming the contract, establishing the general will, and codifying it through sovereign legislation. These all require unanimous participation by the entire people's community. Because these are foundational ideals, the nation's bedrock, while government administration differs. Rousseau believed government enforcement doesn't require full public consensus. Specialized handling is needed, otherwise efficiency suffers. So what occurs during government operation? Rousseau saw governance as competition among three wills: the general will, the government's will, and officials' personal wills. The most rational scenario is government operation aligning with the general will. Consider a nation of 100 people with a 10-person government. Any official acts primarily from personal will. Acting from governmental will has only 1/10 probability. Acting from the general will, nearly 100th probability. Willpower directly determines execution strength and efficiency. Prioritizing efficiency leads to ignoring the general will, shrinking government until one dictator remains. Prioritizing the general will requires expanding government to include everyone, sacrificing efficiency. Thus, governments exist on a spectrum: general will fulfillment versus efficiency and strength. This yields three forms: direct democracy, aristocracy, and monarchy, one-person rule. Rousseau considered elected aristocracy optimal, balancing will and efficiency with wise elites, avoiding hereditary flaws. But in Rousseau's view, human politics is perpetually unstable. Though his social contract principles are enduring, governmental operations face such complex environments that they inevitably erode the state and undermine the people's community. Any good government is nearly temporary, so what can delay this erosion? Rousseau proposed two methods. First, regular assemblies of the people's community to vigilantly monitor governmental overreach, establishing non-governmental institutions to strengthen implementation of the general will. He extensively analyzed Roman Republic politics, where citizens regularly assembled and later instituted tribunes to protect public interests. Second, Rousseau advocated sacralizing this freedom-protecting system by emulating Catholicism, creating a civil religion retaining Catholic principles like God's existence and soul immortality, while adding civic virtues: reverence for law, public service, rationality, and sincerity. Here Rousseau openly criticized France's religious authoritarianism. To avoid France's situation, no church-state fusion. Religions like Catholicism mustn't dominate or compete with the general will. As long as people respect the social contract, they should be free to practice their faith. All right, that covers what this book is about. Let's briefly recap. First, Rousseau wrote The Social Contract to preserve freedom within political order. Second, he proposed a method to achieve this. A political community forms from common interest, unanimously adopts a contract, then codifies it into law through collective authority. Finally, establishing a government to enforce laws, completing the framework. We've interpreted the social contract because 18th century concepts differ greatly from modern thought, requiring contextualization. In essence, envisioning Rousseau's political model as an independent entity, the people's community is the sovereign. The sovereign has its own will, the general will, and the entire people legislate while authorizing the government as the executive body to enforce laws. So, we've now answered what Rousseau's book actually covers. Now that we've covered the main content, let's discuss the impact of the social contract. To assess its influence, we must first look at its publication and dissemination. And in Rousseau's era, European countries commonly had censorship systems, and nations enforced them.
France was likely the strictest.
Under France's old regime, specialized officials handled book censorship. Publishing required prior government approval and thorough content inspection. Many thinkers published anonymously to avoid trouble, unlike others. After gaining fame, Rousseau always signed his works, making his name increasingly prominent. Naturally, Rousseau had tactics against persecution. As a Geneva citizen writing in France, he published his works in Holland. If any step went wrong, he could escape via multiple routes and halt promptly. Breaks? In 1762, The Social Contract was published in Amsterdam. Rousseau implored the bookseller to export it legally to France to avoid trouble. But the book got held up at customs and never entered France. Later, it was smuggled into Paris and circulated privately, causing no issues for Rousseau, but his luck ran out that year. In 1762, Aided by the Marshallus of Luxembourg, Rousseau's other book, Emile, was published simultaneously in Holland and France. Before publishing, he scrutinized the French contract. All key official approvals were secured. But within days after Emile's release, the government flipped. The Paris court banned it and sought Rousseau's arrest. Why? Because Rousseau openly criticized Catholicism in the book, similar to his critique in The Social Contract about civil religion. Learning this, Rousseau fled France, beginning an 8-year exile. This banning hit him hard. First, the sensitive Rousseau suspected the Marshallus arranged publication to deliberately trap him. For 16 years, Rousseau became extremely paranoid, living in constant fear of persecution. Secondly, Rousseau's criticism of religion invited ridicule from his opponents. While Rousseau preached about education, he abandoned his own children. This glaring hypocrisy was publicly exposed, fueling the controversy. This drove Rousseau into self-reflection. He immersed himself in writing his autobiography, Confessions, questioning his own character. Afterward, he never wrote another significant political work. The Social Contract became his definitive political statement. But how many actually read the Social Contract? Before the Revolution, libraries existed throughout France. Scholars studying collections found that despite being banned, a few libraries openly lent it, though such places were extremely rare, similar to other Enlightenment works. Thank you for that answer. This raises a question. Today we glorify the Enlightenment's intellectual flourishing, but at the time, books like The Social Contract were virtually impossible to obtain. So, can we still call Rousseau the intellectual pioneer of the French Revolution? To answer this, we must discuss another book, largely unknown today and rarely read. But before the Revolution, it was an undisputed bestseller. This book was The Year 240. What exactly did it say? How is it connected to Rousseau? And how do we know it was so significant then? To understand this, we must examine pre-revolutionary France's cultural landscape. Paris attracted top thinkers, becoming a pilgrimage site for intellectual and literary pursuits. Tens of thousands of youths flocked there annually, hoping to join elite circles and replicate their success. But intellectual abilities varied greatly. Most Parisian youths lacked proper education or Rousseau's brilliance to stand out. They revered Enlightenment ideas but understood them superficially. Excluded from top tiers, they settled for alternatives. These youths wrote pamphlets, devised marketing schemes for booksellers, and even collaborated on commissioned books. Their works borrowed elite thinkers' concepts to showcase their own insight. Booksellers knew banned books sold best, and knockoffs had huge markets, a perfect match of interests. Even Rousseau himself encountered such things. One of his books was plagiarized. The plagiarism was clumsy, lifting phrases from his work, adding filler, then republishing under new titles and authors. Ironically, profound Enlightenment ideas spread to the masses through such diluted versions. Readers distilled comprehensible fragments into relatable terms for ordinary people. The Year 244 was one such successful attempt. The Year 244 was an 18th century sci-fiction novel with a unique setting. In its Paris storyline, an Englishman exposes France's flaws, provoking the French protagonist into defensive arguments. But the harsh reality remained undeniable. The next morning, he awakens in Paris of the year 2440. In this 25th century, laws are made by the public, with government authorized for administration. People are rational and sincere. Society lacks extreme wealth gaps or arbitrary arrests. Clergy vanished, replaced by statues of great figures in public squares, embodying civic values. Clearly, the Year 2400's plot applies social contract principles for French readers. Interestingly, the author was Rousseau's devoted admirer. He included a telling scene while writing it. And in the 25th century library, Rousseau's works dominate, while his rival Voltaire's superficial writings are burned. How popular was the Year 2440 in France then?
Scholars have conducted in-depth research.
In Neuchâtel, Switzerland, the Société Typographique de Neuchâtel, STN, operated. Renowned for selling forbidden books, they boasted. Books unavailable in France? We have them. And they delivered. They distributed banned book orders to French readers via wholesalers. After orders returned, intermediaries smuggled books back into France.
CSTN's network covered all France, even shaping reading trends.
Their order records survive today, with one listing over 28,000 books. The year 2440 was ordered over 1,300 times, ranking first and accounting for nearly 5% of purchases. Moreover, this book appeared on French customs confiscation lists. It also featured in police raid seizure records at bookstores. After its 1770 debut, it saw 25 editions and translations across Europe. Pre-revolution, this familiarized masses with Rousseau's ideas, though less rigorously than The Social Contract, and readers rarely credited him directly. In 1789, the French Revolution erupted. Rousseau had died 11 years prior, but people could now read The Social Contract directly. Radical leaders like Marat and Robespierre cited Rousseau's political concepts from The Social Contract to advance their agenda. The revolution's mass mobilization mirrored the year 2400's vision. This book deserves immense credit for popularizing social contract theory. In 1794, France's National Convention honored Rousseau by moving his remains to the Pantheon. Later revolutionaries seeking rights through French-inspired movements meticulously studied and promoted Rousseau's works. This is why Rousseau's Social Contract remains essential reading 250 years later. All right, that concludes our discussion of The Social Contract. Keynotes are below the audio. See you next time.